Migration is shaping Australia's future more than almost any other force. In 2024, about 580,000 new residents arrived in Australia, while about 240,000 left permanently, giving us a net migration of over 340,000 people. Now, that's far above our long-term averages, and it raises big questions about how our nation can handle such rapid growth. But who exactly are these new arrivals? Hi, I'm Michael Yardney, and welcome to this week's Demographics Decoded podcast, where leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher and I unveil the trends shaping our futures. Simon, today I'd like to unpack these immigration numbers, the stories behind them, and what this means for Australia's future prosperity. So, whether you're an investor, a business owner, or just curious about what's ahead for Australia, our show today should be a fascinating conversation about Australia's prosperity and our future.
It's good to be on, and it's good to discuss, a topic that I constantly get quizzed about. Migration, prosperity, that is what is on everybody's mind, it seems, at least when they come to my presentations.
Well, there's lots of different feelings about Australia's migration. We see this every time we do a show, the comments that people make, and they have, I guess, mixed feelings. And currently there's obviously those strikes going around, or the challenges people are feeling because of all this. So in a recent article in the New Daily, you explained that international students dominate the intake, making up about 35% of Australia's net migration, while Australia's migration keeps Australia's young, with 90% of Australia's new migrants being under 40. I guess you argue that we need a more strategic approach, Simon.
Absolutely. I have no base problem with the total number of migrants. If we just were to play a numbers game, I'd say sounds about right. What we take in on a long-term average. Are we utilizing migrants to the absolute best of the country? I'd say we are not. I think there are strategic holes in the system, and that I would like to fix. I would like to, again, take a more long-term perspective in terms of what kind of migrants do we channel into the country and what do we want to get out of this?
Well, we'll dig into this as we have our chat today. So let's start with the big picture, with all those, 580,000 arrivals and minus the departures, being a net migration of 340,000. How unusual is this compared to Australia's long-term migration trends?
Yeah, so in the last 2 years, we saw really, really high net overseas migration intake. So the last year that we have data for is what you mentioned. We took in net terms 340,000 new migrants. It means we literally grew the Australian population by 340,000 people by importing those people from overseas. And more people came into the country and people left the country. And we also created babies, by the way. So they add to the population as well. More babies compared to deaths. It's called natural increase.
We're not dying off as fast, are we?
Exactly.
Which is a good thing when you get to my age.
Don't you add to this statistic anytime soon, Michael.
No.
And so, yes, that is a high number, 340,000. It is already heaps down from the just around 440,000 the year below, which was the highest migration intake ever in Australia. But I am not saying that there actually was a migration surge. This was just catch up from this extremely rare situation during the pandemic where we lost migration. Since Federation 1901, essentially always added more people to the country. Australia was a migration nation. We imported people from overseas. Then the pandemic comes along. We don't take in anyone new, and we say to migrants that are in the country, no financial assistance is going to be extended to you, bugger off. They bugger off. That creates negative net migration. Very, very rare position. Of course, while this occurs, our universities that are heavily reliant on international students, they don't have international students. They struggle financially. And of course, as soon as those universities are allowed to take in international migrants, international students again, they do. And so they fill up their spots. So the migration surge that we've seen in the post-pandemic time, that was just taking in 3.5 years worth of international students in 1.5 years. That then makes those figures look absolutely ridiculously high. But if you average out the migration intake in Australia from the beginning of the pandemic until today, and you compare it to the same amount of time before the pandemic, it is pretty much the same. I think 1.8% bigger It was post-pandemic, but this is going to slow down as well because we already pulled a couple of policy levers that ensures that migration goes down. So if we record the podcast again in a year or two, we will see that post-pandemic compared to pre-pandemic, we saw migration decline.
Well, international students are an essential pillar to our economy. We've spoken frequently on this podcast about the four underlying pillars that grow Australia's wealth: mining, agriculture, international education, and tourism. But I've, in your article, read there's just under 1.1 million international students currently enrolled in Australia, the highest number we've recorded. What does this mean for our universities, our workforce, and I guess for the housing market? Because a lot of people are suggesting it's the international students who are pushing up house prices and in particular rents.
So there are a couple of numbers to pick out. So you can either measure international students that are on the ground on a specific day, or you can measure student enrollments in the calendar year. And so of those 1.1 million international students that were in Australia in 2024, not all of them were here at the same time, because semester starts, semesters finish, people come. And so you have around 800,000 or thereabouts at any given time in the country. So that's a bit lower. It's still a very, very high number. And we, of course, take them in because on average, an international student pays $30,000 in educational fees per year, and they create another $30,000 to $35,000 in economic activity each year. Essentially, you say you take an international student and they create $65,000 worth of economic deliciousness in this country. So it is quite easy to get hooked on this. And of course, so universities love this. Universities absolutely rely on this. International students, to a surprisingly small degree, much more, because we are used to this narrative that so many international students just come here to secretly drive Ubers or something like this. Most international students do actually just study, and they might have a small part-time job where they might wait in a cafe, or they might tutor at university. And even if you tutor for a couple of hours at university, you're technically employed. That's just neither here nor there. So they're not adding to the workforce all that much. The universities love them. And of course, international students do take up room. They live somewhere. Most of them, if they are enrolled at the university, actually live in what is called purpose-built student accommodation. These are if you want to talk it down, people say these are shoebox-sized apartments. And it's true, these are not big apartments, but you're not there to live in this. You want a more kind of dorm room experience. You have a small studio-style dwelling and lots of shared amenities in those dwellings. But my problem with students at housing isn't that they're occupying this housing stock. The housing stock that international students occupy is only occupied by international students. There's no one else in there. So they're not competing on the housing market to a large degree with the rest of the market.
No.
The only place where international students really impact the housing market is that somebody built those purpose-built student accommodations. If I'm a construction company that is building an international student tower, I am not building a residential dwelling or an office tower at the same time. So yes, you're competing for the workforce. So that is absolutely real. It's not overly big considering the size of the market, because sooner or later you saturate the international student market. You have some sort of baseline of 900,000, 800,000, 900,000 international students that need to be housed. And of course, the purpose-built student companies, they want to say, well, I have more of them live in purpose-built student accommodation, so they want to grow their market. But overall, there is some sort of market cap in there. You can only put that many into purpose-built student dwellings into the country. And once this is reached, the impact on the housing market can be completely discounted for. We're not there yet, but sooner or later this will be the case. My actual problem with international students, the high international student numbers, is that if you take a limit on migration, and you could say we can take in about, in the long-term average, 250,000 net new migrants, and we let heaps of them be international students, that means we take in fewer skilled workers. And that's where we are a bit naive. And I would say weaponize international students. I would say ensure we know where these skills shortages in rough terms will be in 5 to 10 years' time. I would say take this seriously and fast-track visas for degrees that prepare workers for those sectors. So let's say we need structural engineers, we need aged care workers, we need doctors. For those degrees, take in international students, make it extremely easy for them to get permanent residency, as long as sponsored permanent residency, meaning as employer sponsored. So as soon as they get their degrees, they get onto a temporary visa and then on a permanent visa if they do this kind of job that we want them to do. And then we create a pipeline for our skills shortages. At the moment, you just take in whatever international student you feel like. We need to integrate our future skills needs and the university degrees a bit better. This needs to be combined. And then you create an awesome worker, because the international student migrant at this point has been integrated into Australian society for about 4 years, and they're educated by definition to our standard. So that makes them a very, very attractive migrant, actually a better migrant than just a skilled migrant that we take in at age 25 with their German or Malaysian degree.
Well, interestingly, a lot of people send their children to Australia to get their degrees in the hope that they eventually become permanent residents. So I'm sure there's a big demand for that. Simon, you've argued the student numbers are going to soon fall back as the 2022 intakes finish their studies. How is this going to change the migration picture in the next couple of years?
What will happen in the migration picture is that we take in about 240, 250,000 net new migrants each year. That is by now pretty much set in stone. That's the overall figures. You can't really control this as much, by the way. So people say, oh, we want to cut 50,000 migrants. It's not that easy to direct it that way from a government perspective. We signed certain kind of international treaties in terms of how many asylum seekers we need to take in. That's small, very small numbers in Australia, so we don't need to worry about this too much. We are in no control about how many people actually leave the country. We kind of need to make estimates on it when we let visas in. So you can be off quite a bit in this kind of game. We say we are in full control of migration. It means we are saying who can come in. We can say this, but managing these numbers on the dot is rather difficult.
Now, we've talked about students, and they make up a significant portion of our migrants, but Australia's migration is a lot more than just students. People are coming here, family formation stage. What other trends have you noticed over the last couple of years about the migrants who are coming to Australia?
Well, we take in a different ethnic mix of migrants. So the wave of the Mediterranean migrants that we've seen in the 50s and 60s in particular, the Greeks, the Italians, the Maltese, that's gone. And we did not turn our back on our Maltese or Italian or Greek friends. It's just that there are no young Europeans left to import to Australia at scale. So we therefore take in people from, well, wherever, really. We don't have any ethnic goal in our migration scheme. So it's not we said, like, we have too many Indians, we want more Brazilians or something like this. That's not existent. Yeah. Ultimately, if you tick a certain kind of box, either you're willing to pay an arm and a leg for your uni degree, then you welcome in, or you tick the boxes in terms of what kind of skill do you bring with you? Do we need that kind of skill? And then we let you in. And of course, the skilled migration list, which is, I compared it in the past to Uber Eats, where in Uber Eats you say one burger, one fry, and a big Coke, and that gets delivered to your house. And the skilled migration list is a bit like this. We say 500 structural engineers, 25,000 nurses, 200,000 aged care workers, whatever we want. Yeah, these numbers were too high. But the idea is we put these numbers on there, and then as long as people with these qualifications come and apply, we let them in. So it's a pretty convenient way of doing this. We're not actually linking the visa to actually working in this job. We're just testing for the qualifications. That could be tightened a bit more. And I understand part of the anger of migration, because you see, it's a beautiful scapegoat, and you of course see that migration, this surge occurred in just the wrong time, when the GDP per capita shrank, when people said, like, lots of economic indicators are pointing not in our favor, cost of living goes up, and we take in more people. It's not a good look. At the same time, we're not telling the story correctly. The story will say how much of our future wealth relies on that. We talked so much in this podcast in the past about the prolonged skills shortage. The simple fact that we age as a country and therefore keep running out of workers, even in an environment where AI and robotics become cooler and better and more cheaper each year, we still run out of workers. So it is a rather big privilege to be a country where people want to move to so that we can continue to grow the population base based on migration. That isn't a given at all. It is rather special that we have this. Yeah, but we're not selling it. And then sometimes we do really dumb stuff. I think when you increase migration numbers, at the same time, politically speaking, it is helpful to tighten a couple of laws about if you break the law, we kick you out. Something like this is, psychologically speaking, it'll be the case for very, very few people. But psychologically speaking, it takes a bit of the edge and
Yes.
migration anger out of it. So
Yes.
you want to manage this a bit. In the last, I couldn't actually believe it when I first saw it. The Labour Party softened the English language requirements for migrants recently. I say
Really?
this is a very bad look. So you need some sort of IELTS as an English language score, and you now need a slightly lower score to get into the country. And you go, boah, that's not helping. It's a bad look. Until I kind of figured out, I think nobody says anything about it, but I think the reason for it is that we need heaps of aged care workers, and these are low-skilled workers with, on average, poor English language skills. And so we did not manage to get enough aged care workers into the system because of the language barrier. That is my working theory. I have no proof for this, by the way. So if you are in the know, if you tap the phone of the migration ministry or anything, drop a comment and let us know what's actually going on.
That'd be interesting. Now, a lot of people do comment on these videos, and if you're finding this an interesting conversation, wherever you're watching or listening to this, why not subscribe to the podcast or follow it? Different channels have different ways of keeping in contact so that you once a week get the information from Simon and me about these important trends shaping our futures. And by the way, if you're finding this useful, send it to a friend. There's a share button on every podcast app as well, so they can get benefit from Simon's knowledge as well. Now, we were starting to say, Simon, though, that Australia's an ageing population. We've discussed this in previous podcasts, but 90% of the arrivals are under 40. This obviously helps our ageing population and I guess helps our tax system, doesn't it, with more taxpayers?
Oh, absolutely. It does well and truly keep us young. And and everyone is hooked on it. So since we are shrinking the workforce, so the dependency ratio, the share of workers compared to non-workers, that keeps shrinking and shrinking. So it is rather difficult. So we are hooked on migration. There is no plausible government in our future that would slow down the migration intake. You must ignore every politician who talks about cutting migration numbers. We need them for the workforce. We're hooked on this. And of course, we run a system that relies on income tax. 52 to 54% changes every year of the tax that the federal government collects is income tax. So that, of course, then means that the treasurer would never ever allow the PM to cut migration numbers. It cannot happen. So you can only ever listen to any politician, or take them seriously at least, about cutting migration numbers when at the same time they tell you how they fill the tax gap. And that would be by stopping your reliance on income tax. You make sure that everyone keeps a much larger share of their income, of their paycheck. And then you tax consumption. You massively increase GST, and you create a wealth tax. You create a property tax, land tax, something like this. You create a death tax, inheritance tax, something like this. If the politician does not, at the same time, they're talking about cutting migration by 50,000 people, 100,000 people, they're charlatans. That is not happening. I've heard this too many times. The last time the Liberals talked tough with Morrison before the election, cutting migration by 50,000 people, they took in record high numbers each year they were in power. It will not happen. This is a high migration regime, whether you like it or not, whether this is your favorite scapegoat or not. We could operate on a slower migration intake, but then you need to just suffer prolonged skills shortages. God knows if we were to manage around this, and we would need to completely change the way we tax people. If you can pull this off politically, be my guest and cut migration. In the short term, I find all those calls to cutting migration, it's just pure populism.
Well, unfortunately, one of the challenges with migration is that we're not building enough homes or enough infrastructure to support them all. We know that most migrants rent for the first couple of years, and then they want to buy a home, often in the suburbs where their communities are. That's one of the reasons they've come to Australia. They've got the aspiration of home ownership. And so that's going to underpin our housing markets over the next couple of years, especially since they're family formation age and they're going to want children and more bedrooms. And these demographic trends are Amongst the things that our team at Metropole take into account when putting strategic property plans together for clients, you're going to find at Metropole, my team, are much more than just buyers agents. What they do is help our clients safely grow into generational wealth by building substantial property portfolios, not taking advantage of people or tenants, but actually providing accommodation that these people require. So if you're interested in making the most of this new property cycle that we're currently experiencing, go to metropole.com.au. There's a link in the show notes that explains how you can be in contact with us. Now, Simon, I know you use all this information to advise industries, organizations, governments, semi-government authorities. What is your take on this? How do you help your clients?
Well, we try to help clients by make them understand their own slice of the world through the demographic lens. We add one more perspective to their already complex worldview, and that is the mostly predictable demographic worldview, where you understand the shifting market size, you understand shifting consumer values, and with this in your back pocket, you should be able to make a slightly smarter business decision that gives you a bit of an edge in the market.
Well, Simon, we've spoken about the lack of infrastructure, the lack of housing a short while ago in one of the previous podcasts. By the way, if you enjoy these podcasts, there's a whole library of them wherever you're watching this or listening to this. Go back and you'll hear our thoughts on that. But if we cut immigration, is that going to solve the housing problem?
No, I don't think it does. We've seen, for example, when migration was negative during the pandemic years, that housing still went up.
Yes.
The low interest rates was partly to blame for that, if you will. But my main take is that housing is expensive by choice in Australia, that we do not actively drive policy that drives house prices down. So there is much more to this. So even if we were to cut migration significantly, do I think that house prices would fall? I don't. I think this is the, to quote John Howard again, who famously quipped that he never met a voter that complained about their house going up in value. And you still have 3/4 of Australian voters, not all of residents, but 3/4 of Australian voters own their house outright or they hold a mortgage on it. So why would this majority of Australians be in favor of falling house prices? They're not. They actually, if you ask Bill Shorten, they vote actively against you if you suggest that house prices go down. Bill Shorten, of course, famously lost the unlosable election because he essentially said, I make your housing a bit cheaper, or he said, I make housing more affordable. Whatever way you want to put it. That's not working in the short term, politically speaking. So therefore, again, my main focus is that housing will remain very expensive. Rising house prices are baked into the system. They're desired by the system. Yeah, sure, cut migration a bit, but don't expect house prices to fall.
I'd agree with that. Finally, Simon, if you could redesign Australia's migration strategy, what would be your top priorities?
The number one priority would be to ensure that the pipeline of skilled migrants becomes more weaponized, more long-term focused. We have this skilled migration list that I mentioned before. There is still a lot of nonsense on there. We are not reacting fast enough. We need to only focus on the really important specific jobs there. Every industry is constantly lobbying that their particular jobs get squeezed on there. And so there is a lot of jobs on there, too much. We need to be more strategic about it. Then I want to understand what our most strategic problems are. And I want to make sure that for these kind of jobs that we need the most in 4, 5, 6 years, we take in international students. We take those international students through school, we educate them really well, and we then pretty much invite them to stay with a very easy, cheap, transparent visa pathway, because that's for many students what they want. And then you create a pipeline of workers, because by then people invested 3-4 years of their life into this. They get integrated into society, and we snatch them up as workers. I think that would be one of probably my biggest migration focus to begin with.
Well, as we've discussed, migration is one of the great forces shaping Australia's destiny, and that's one of the reasons we discuss this frequently on this podcast. The figures that we just showed you show that most of them are young, many of them are students. But as Simon explained, migration is rejuvenating our nation, keeps our economy growing, but it also raises tough questions about skill shortages, housing pressures, and whether we got the right balance of the type of visas. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Demographics Decoded. As I said a bit earlier on, if you found it valuable, please share it with a friend or a colleague. There's a share button on every podcast app. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future discussions. Because, Simon, next week I'd like to have a talk about what's currently driving our economy. A number of years ago, your business partner, Bernard Sol, said it was smashed avocados. I think it's actually a little bit different to that. So can we discuss that next week?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kirstenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.